This trilogy of videos that are going to come up soon, they're all around ethical research, assessing AI in education. How do we control for it? How do we assess for it? Ultimately, do we put students in a bind? Do we imprison them? Do we create a panopticon that the students just slot into like prisoners? Do we treat them like prisoners? Do we treat every instance of AI as something to be punished, or do we just allow students to use it, but use it ethically? Not to get ahead of myself in these videos, but there has to be some sort of middle ground between the students and the education system. Both have to work on what the future of AI is. This particular video is going to be about the concept of ethical research. I'm going to talk a little bit about ethical research pre-AI, plagiarism, essay mills, copying your mates, all that sort of stuff. And I'm going to look at ethical research post-AI, because that's the big one. That's the big one at the moment we're trying to figure out. In this video, I'm going to look at the challenges and the implications of ethical research in relation to AI. There's a lot of issues around it, a lot of grey areas. We're not quite sure what to do. One of the big things at the moment is there's a lack of guidance and a lack of policy for colleges, so we're not quite sure what to do. As I said, it's the Wild West. We don't know what to do. We struggle sometimes. Do we punish the students? Do we give them more information about AI? I think we should. I think that's going to be the solution to it, and how to use it ethically. Ethics is important. Most students are familiar with ethics if they're doing sort of qualitative, quantitative research. If you're gathering data, how do you gather it ethically? And that has to do with transparency, honesty, making sure that the people you're interviewing feel comfortable. Critical thinking, very important, still very relevant. I think that's a great way of navigating AI, teaching the students, right from wrong, how to gather information correctly, honestly, with transparency, the dangers of bias, what is relevant research, what is the quality of research, and how do we define the quality of it? And of course, where does it all lead? We have to assess this, we have to monitor it, and ultimately we have to control it. But how much do we control it? That's the issue. Do we control it so specifically that it just becomes this panopticon, as I mentioned before? Do we just treat students as prisoners? And how do we treat them as prisoners? How do we monitor every single student? There's some scary notions of surveillance there, and almost entrapment. You're almost sort of tricking the students into disclosing that they've used AI. So yeah, I'm going to look at all of that under the term of ethical research. It's a broad term, but I'm hoping in this video we can come to some sort of middle ground and some sort of understanding of it all. Now, obviously, in this day and age, very, very hard to get away from any sort of educational landscape which is not framed by AI. Indeed, as we can see from these articles, artificial intelligence is increasingly influencing the educational landscape it's now framing. And we see the entire spectrum of the educational landscape in Ireland, from primary school right up to third level, and how it's affecting it in different facets. Sometimes it's used to assist in personalised lesson plans or automating administrative tasks, while in other places we see it compiling pupil reports and assessing vocational work. And in this instance, we see that AI could enable teachers to focus more on direct student engagement. And it all underscores the main points of these articles, that AI should complement and not replace the human element of teaching. One of the big topics around AI usage is the supposed loss of critical thinking. And I do think it is important, and I do think there is a definite loss of critical thinking if a student over-relies on the use of AI. And indeed, in these articles, some teachers have observed students using AI to bypass cognitive efforts. And they mention this potentially leading to issues such as cheating and reduced attention spans. There's obviously mixed feelings about the impact of AI depending on someone's skill with how they use it. Some people get a lot out of it, and some people get nothing out of it. And I think there's an argument to be made there about a student who is well versed in AI and how to use it correctly and ethically has a sort of a good knock-on effect then for those who consume what that student then produces. And obviously those that consume it would be the lecturers, the supervisors and the staff. Other issues is the potential biases in AI algorithms, ethical concerns around privacy and data security, all very important of course. And sometimes that's married with the need for continuous professional development and fostering AI literacy among students, staff and stakeholders. So we seem at an impasse, a crossroads, where we have this tool which is causing us incredible difficulty and raising dilemmas, but which is also necessary now. And how schools and colleges navigate those crossroads can often lead to one place banning AI and one place championing it. And I think in the current academic landscape at the moment, we're in the middle, where we're not quite sure whether we should ban it or take it in. In this EdTech magazine, AI is noted to be a game changer for students with disabilities, and it is revolutionizing education for these type of students by providing personalized learning experiences. We have text-to-speech applications, real-time captioning, and of course AI tutors. And these all enable students with learning difficulties to access education material in more inclusive ways. However, again, like all the other examples, there is a balance needed. Now, regarding university usage and ethical research and ethical guidelines, the scholarly consensus indicates that university students generally have a positive perception of AI tools for academic purposes, and they recognize their benefits in personalized learning experiences. And of course, in enhancing academic performance and fostering innovation. Obviously, we have AI writing assistants, grammar checkers, and these are the most commonly used tools by students. And these technologies offer advantages such as improved communication, and there is scope for collaborative learning opportunities and personalized content recommendations. However, the same students also express concerns about misinformation, data security, and of course, ethical implications. So, regarding ethical concerns, several ethical dilemmas always arise when AI is integrated into academia, and I think it's important to sort of go through these ones. Obviously, the big one, academic integrity and plagiarism. And I suppose the ease with which AI can generate essays, research papers, and even programming codes. This does raise concerns then about plagiarism, and of course the authenticity of students' work. And then of course, if students rely too heavily on AI, they may bypass the critical thinking and learning processes that are essential to academic development, and of course to career development. Another concern is bias and fairness. AI models are trained on vast datasets that may contain biases, and this can lead to unfair or discriminatory outcomes. An example here will be an AI grading system which might favor certain writing styles or perspectives over others, and it could disadvantage students from more diverse backgrounds. Another concern, transparency, accountability. Many AI tools operate as black boxes, and this makes it difficult to understand their decision-making processes. If an AI system misgrades a student's work or produces misleading information, then determining responsibility becomes a massive challenge. Privacy, data security, also another important concern. AI in academia often relies on student data to improve its algorithms, and without proper safeguards, sensitive information may be misused. And of course, this raises concerns about privacy violations and of course about the data security itself. But chief among all the concerns, and it's always raised a lot of the time, and that's dependence on AI, or rather over-dependence on AI. And so while AI can enhance learning, excessive reliance on it may diminish a student's ability to think critically and independently. So we have the issue there, can we disentangle the student from the AI? Can we disentangle the student from their supposed symbiotic relationship with AI now? Indeed, if students use AI-generated content without comprehension, then they risk undermining their own intellectual growth. Obviously, tools like ChatGPT and Copilot, these have been heavily criticized as impacting academic integrity and critical thinking. Now, their impact on academia, to me, seems twofold. On the one hand, it does enhance learning and it is a valuable learning aid. And it does help students grasp difficult concepts and to help them structure their writing and to generate ideas. And it allows them to do this ad nauseum. So there's no fear of a lecturer or a supervisor getting tired or sick of their questions. They can just keep doing it over and over and over again. I think that's important for the learning process, is that a student has the ability to trial run their ideas. However, on the other hand, the accessibility of AI-generated content, of course, it raises ethical concerns regarding authorship and authenticity. And so we just keep coming around to the same old problems. Students may submit other people's work as their own. And this, of course, leads to academic dishonesty. And because AI tools are free and there really is no barrier to entry, it just encourages overuse of it. Now, chief among all of this is the challenge in detection. Unlike traditional plagiarism, AI-generated content is not so easy to spot. Now, anyone who's ever had a rogue student, I suppose is the better term for them, you frequently have that sort of thing in your back pocket where you're saying, where did you copy and paste that from? What book did you pilfer that from? That seems to be gone now because AI-generated content doesn't just take from one source, it takes from multiple sources, and it cleans the data to such an extent that where it actually gets the information from, it's not so easy to trace. And therefore, when you're pulling a student up on plagiarism, it's very hard to actually pinpoint if it is indeed from multiple sources like a book, or if it is AI generated. Now, I will come back to this in another video on how to monitor and control it. But as a key point here in relation to ethical research, we're not quite there yet on how to detect it. Now, going hand in hand with this idea of monitoring and controlling ethical research is the issue that, well, there doesn't seem to be any or much ethical AI guidelines out there, especially not in relation to colleges. Now, there have been some traffic light systems developed, and of course each individual department is usually left up to its own discretion regarding how to use, monitor, or assess AI usage by students. But no matter what, we do have to develop clear ethical AI guidelines going forward. There's a few points around this that are very important. One of them is obviously promoting AI literacy. That is very important. And educators should teach students how to use AI, and they should teach them how to use it responsibly or ethically. And they should definitely emphasize its role as a supplementary tool rather than a replacement for critical thinking and learning, both of which they will need when they enter the workforce, and both of which will count against them when they go to ascend the career ladder. In establishing clear academic policies, institutions should define ethical AI use guidelines, and this means specifying acceptable and unacceptable applications of AI-generated content in both coursework and research. And this means obviously enhancing transparency. And I'll kick that back over to the other side as well. Developers should create AI models with explainability features. And this would allow users to understand how decisions are made. And it does ensure that accountability in AI-driven grading or recommendations. The minefield of obviously data protection, data privacy, data security. So universities, they have to enforce strict data protection measures to prevent the misuse of student information. Again, we look at everything pre and post AI. It's almost like the new BC AD, timeline designation. We assess pre-AI with examinations, assignments, essays, theses, and then if you're doing your Viva or even your Masters, we have an oral exam. Still the same, not much has changed. It's sort of widened a little bit more. We're still trying to figure out how do we detect AI, how do we monitor it. If you're a lecturer or educator or work in the academic system, you're probably aware of the traffic light system. I'm going to look at that in this video. I'm going to look at other ways colleges have detected AI, have sought it out. How do we detect it? Can we even detect it? That's the big question at the moment, is like, how far can a student use AI and get away with it? That's still an issue at the moment. And once we're through the traffic light system, what's the next stage? How far again do we just assess and do we control for everything? Obviously, I keep mentioning the panopticon. That's ultimately the next stage where you just go, okay, do you know what? The students, we're not going to give them any leeway. We're just going to go, do you know what? If you're going to use AI, we're going to punish you for it. And we're going to trap you in a system that means you're constantly monitored. And in this video, I'm going to look at how that monitoring happens. I also think it's very important to remind people that the system that you use to monitor and control people is the same system that will be used on you. We're all in this together. The panopticon, it doesn't discriminate. It's like who watches the watchers. AI acknowledgements, AI declarations, the notion of audit trails, showing your workings, show exactly how you used AI, where you used it, give me a detailed breakdown of how you use this tool to help yourself. I think it's also important to look at what students think of this whole situation. What is their input into these policies and roadmaps? I think it's important that they do have a say. Again, they're not prisoners. We shouldn't use terminology like banned or illegal or, consequences. I mean, there's consequences for everything. AI ultimately is a beneficial tool. And if you ban it or keep calling it this, that, and the other, then you can't use it either without that same discrimination. As a supervisor and examiner myself, over the last couple of years, the assessment criteria has slowly started moving out and out now to allow for different things. You're always going to have people who plagiarize, who use essay mills, get their mate to write it, copy and paste. Nothing has changed. It's like you had the early 2000s when I went to college. You had the internet, and then you had Wikipedia much later, and nothing has changed. Now it's just AI. But the same problems are still there. These things can get out of hand pretty quickly. I always use my COVID analogy here. AI is the education system's version of COVID. It just came in so quickly. We're trying to figure it out. The worst thing we can do is to just have a shotgun approach. And you treat every student as if, they're a danger to the system. It's like, okay, we're just going to assume you're all using AI and we're all going to have and it's just a blanket level of punishment for everyone and surveillance for everyone. So yeah, I think this video is very relevant if you're a lecturer or you're a student. I think it's good from both angles to look at this video and say, where am I on the spectrum? Am I in danger of leaning too hard on the students? And as a student, you kind of say, am I in danger of bringing this stuff in because I haven't been transparent? The future is bright, as I say. Doesn't have to be doom and gloom, but we do have to have a discussion about this, I think. Now, the million-dollar question: how do we monitor and control the use of AI in academia? Can we do it? Is it possible to even do that? In relation to my own country, Ireland, some universities have taken up the challenge. One of the main ways of doing this is the traffic light system. It's a relatively simple system. You have red, AI use is strictly prohibited. Amber, it's permitted for specific purposes under module coordinator guidance. And then we have, of course, green, which means you're allowed. Go nuts. But you still must adhere to academic integrity practices and principles, and they're defined differently by different colleges. So we still need to understand what exactly academic integrity means in relation to AI usage. Basically, how much is too much AI usage? So where does the student stop and where does the AI start, and vice versa? Now, I'll list a few different things here. We can see different colleges tackling the issue of monitoring and controlling the use of AI. Obviously, I mentioned the traffic light system. UCD, College of Arts and Humanities, they've implemented that in spring 2024 and they've updated it in September 2024. I'd imagine they're going to be updating that for the rest of their lives. That's just par for the course with AI. But it does show that things have changed dramatically, and colleges that ignore AI are now having to play catch up. It was never going to go away. And I get it. As someone who noticed that on the horizon a few years back, I knew it wasn't going to go away. And how I knew that quite simply was that my business was shipped off, packed and sealed by AI into the netherworld of destruction. So it is good to see colleges finally tackle the issue of how to monitor and how to control it. And it's good to see as well that the word banned and illegal have finally stopped being used in relation to AI. And all these guidelines and traffic light systems, they do have a very surface level approach of letting the students know, hey, we know you're using AI. And not only that, but we'd like to meet you halfway. And of course, those approaches, it just ensures clarity, consistency, and responsible AI use. From looking at all the different colleges in Ireland and abroad, and their ethical guidelines in relation to AI, I did notice 3 rationales for why the guidelines are there. And usually the first rationale is to provide clear AI usage guidelines for students. The second one is usually to ensure ethical and responsible AI use in academic work. And then the third one, and the most famous one, is to maintain academic integrity. Now, that's not to say that academic integrity wasn't always there. But now it's been challenged and dragged kicking and screaming to the forefront of college policy and guidelines now. Colleges that use the traffic light system, red, amber, green, they all slightly differ in what those mean. And again, we need some consistency here. It's okay, we're still in the early days of adopting AI into universities. But generally, Amber and green, from what I could see, it just means that AI can be used in ways that support learning. And one of the ways I've seen that the most is in correction of spelling, grammar, and punctuation. So there is almost this resignation that students can just use tools to improve that. And those amber and green checks can also be seen in relation to translation, citation, writing enhancement, where you just improve the style and the tone, and planning and structuring. Now, to me, that sounds like everything. And it does raise the question of, do we just resign ourselves also to the fact that academic writing is not important to a student, that some sort of machine will take care of that for the students, and then by the time the lecturer or by the time the supervisor gets their work, it has been cleaned, and how it was cleaned is almost irrelevant. It's just taken as a given. And that's going to change the nature of obviously how we assess for academic writing among students. Do we just offer no marks anymore because we realize then that, well, they're not going to bother, because the traditional means of a student acquiring academic writing skills now seems gone? Always in tandem with these principles and guidelines and how we assess, monitor, control is, well, you must use these tools ethically, responsibly, and critically. And from my reading and understanding of the guidelines, I think that's very unclear. And I think the reason it's unclear is that we're at the frontier of a new age, and we're not going to know. And I think ultimately it comes down to assessment. I think we've lost the battle of trying to get students to engage with academic writing when these tools do it for them. So therefore we have to move on to the next battle, which is, how do we assess it? Do we even grade it anymore? One thing I do see whispered in the background, probably needs to be brought to the forefront a bit more, is that we need a type of audit trail. And if AI is used, well then students must properly acknowledge it. And they can do this through a variety of means. They can list all the AI prompts or conversations in an appendix, let's say. Or they can share their document history to show any edits and revisions. They can write a personal reflection type piece of how they used AI, how they found it, how it helped them, why they used it. Now, the why they used it will often be because it's there. Everyone else is using it, why can't I? So I think that's a very good way of doing it, is this type of an audit trail. And I think it takes less pressure off the supervisor and lecturer and academic staff who, to be quite honest, we don't want to become prison wardens, essentially, prison guards, trying to monitor students on how they use AI. And we don't want to try use detective work to try and catch them. We'd much rather say, okay, you're using it, grand, whatever. Provide all the documentation of how you used it and how it helped you write this. Now, is there scope to produce a live Google Docs document where all work done by a student is done on a, as I said, like a live document where a supervisor can check to see, log every keystroke, everything used, everything gets put into it. Nothing is private, I suppose, in the writing of an assignment or a thesis. This creates a type of panopticon. Lecturers and thesis supervisors now face a new challenge. How do we fairly assess student work, especially work that has been generated, assisted, or influenced by AI? Now, the traditional grading criteria, the rubric, many books on it. Here's some stuff on the screen many academic staff would be very familiar with. Nightmare-inducing stuff. But all of this, originality, depth of analysis, research integrity, how we grade according to those metrics, well, that's going to be reshaped now by AI-generated content. And so us educators must adapt their assessment methods to ensure students are still developing critical thinking, still developing their research skills, and that there's still some independent academic integrity, while also recognizing that, okay, they're using AI still. So how do we assess them in relation to the AI? Now, that's if it's not prompted correctly. And I think that's the important thing, is that for me, it's much easier to spot a less skilled AI user than an expert AI user. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, is that when we train students to be really good at using AI, we won't be able to tell. They'll be able to hide all these markers. They can just ask the ChatGPT or the Copilot or whatever tool they're using and say, here are a list of the most common markers of AI-generated coursework. Can you remove them from the piece you just wrote for me? And then it's game over. I think a far more valid method of assessing and monitoring AI usage in the students is to look at their track record overall. I even noticed this in my own students where, You have a quote-unquote bad student who suddenly becomes the world's greatest researcher and linguist overnight. And it's quite clear to me that they were not involved in this transformation process that miraculously occurred. So that's one way of doing it. You could just look at, well, your essay here was god awful. This essay here is amazing. What happened? And this is where sometimes people mention the oral presentations, the Viva. And I think that's very important because there's no quicker way to catch someone out on their supposed expertise than to debate them live. Now, I've had the misfortune of doing this with some of my students where I can see their eyes looking at 20 different pages of notes around their Zoom screen. So I do think that's going to be a bigger issue is resource management. We can't obviously meet every single student in person. The logistics of it, very difficult. Another major issue with all this, which has not really been discussed yet, is students who use AI or students who began to use AI halfway through their course or degree or master's. They're a little bit easier to spot because suddenly there's a jump in quality. But the new entrants to college who will just use AI from the get-go, well, now all their work is going to be consistent because they're just using one thing to generate ideas and content. So there won't be any discrepancy. And I think that's why colleges panicked. I do think that is somewhere in the back of their mind is that it's not the present issue, it's the future issues. So I think it's important then to shift assessment criteria to encourage independent thought. And lecturers and thesis supervisors can certainly refine grading rubrics to emphasize skills that AI cannot fully replicate. So we just focus basically on other skills. And obviously one of the big ones is critical thinking and argumentation. Now, when I tested ChatGPT and other tools, I found critical thinking and argumentation and its ability to do so reasonably good. And that comes down to my expertise as a researcher and, over 15 years of research behind me and many years of prompting experience. So I know exactly how to use AI. So I can bring it up to speed to my own level, essentially. However, for new students who are just getting the grips with it, I think it's still important to highlight critical thinking and argumentation. Now, these terms have become kind of sullied in the last couple of years, especially in the debate purgatory that we live in at the moment. Everything is political, everything is highly contentious. Critical thinking is a term that's just bandied around in the same vein as, I do my own research, or, trust me, bro, or source me. So I think we have to teach students why it's important that they should have critical thinking skills instead of just saying you should have critical thinking skills. And instead of simply evaluating the quality of their writing, we should assess instead how well students develop their own arguments or how they complement the details that the AI can provide. Now, this will require students to critique AI-generated suggestions or incorporate multiple perspectives, sometimes their own. And as I mentioned earlier, assignments could include a reflective piece where students justify their methodology and their thought processes. Now, with regards to programs like Elicit, which can gather and collect and collate data very efficiently, very quick, we must then increase a focus on students' ability to find, assess, and properly cite academic sources rather than just relying on AI summaries. And this means it requires engagement with peer-reviewed sources and to show evidence that there is deep reading going on. And linked to all this is obviously process documentation. You just, as I mentioned, the audit trail. And you're basically encouraging students to document their research and their writing process. Anyone who's done the Leaving Cert in Ireland, in particular Leaving Cert Maths, will know the crime of just putting the answer down on the paper and not showing your workings. And the workings is basically to show that you didn't accidentally come to the correct answer, or that you didn't just copy it, that you understand how you got there. And I think something similar in academia in relation to research skills, methodologies will be very important. We do obviously have a methodology chapter in a thesis, but I think a methodology, if you could step back and sort of thinking about thinking almost, you could draw somewhat from the ethnographic sphere in that regard. Now, all of this will of course mean that we need to implement mandatory research logs or AI use declarations. You have to get the student to disclose if and how they used AI. I don't think we're there just yet. I think a lot of students still treat AI as some sort of trap. It's very hard to get a student to admit that they use it. And I think there is some blame there for academia in its initial outcry, in banning it, calling it illegal, calling it every name under the sun. I don't think that helped in the long run. It is fixable though, and how it's fixable is through this transparency. Acknowledge if you used AI, have oral defenses, presentations. You could have live assignments in class. One of the big institutions in Ireland is, of course, the civil service. They banned ChatGPT when it first came out. Now, I mention them because they have a very foolproof method of screening potential workers into the civil service. And it's through an examination process where you basically have your phone on you, a camera essentially on you, while you answer questions on the screen. And it's basically to discourage cheating. Something like that, possibly. Now finally, in relation to thesis supervision, how do we assess, how do we control, how do we monitor it? I think grading should involve a deeper scrutiny of the students' research methodology, their critical engagement, and of course their quote-unquote originality. And in a way, instead of assessing, I mentioned earlier about the new entrants to college who basically just all the work is AI generated or AI infused, so it's very hard to tell one from the other. However, the personal reflections and the thinking about thinking, I think all of that is very important. And reviewing those early drafts and personal reflections over time, I think that will give a better indicator of how a student is progressing. And by incorporating process-oriented grading, oral defenses, transparency policies, I think educators can ensure that students engage deeply with academic material while also leveraging AI responsibly.